Hello everybody, this is AK. I'm back. So on screen you see a screen capture of a program by CNA Channel News Asia Insider, and it's a short video about 9 minutes long, and in that video they interview Keith from Investment Modes. And those of us who have been around for a while would know Investment Modes, started by Keith, and he's still blogging actively, and his blog is a few years older than mine. So he has been blogging for what, 20 years? I've been blogging for 15 years, so I think maybe he has been blogging for 20 years. And if you haven't seen that video yet, I'll leave a link in the description box below to that video, right? And I also left a comment in that video by CNA Insider, and I said that if anyone is interested in achieving financial freedom and indeed achieving it earlier in life, it is a video worth watching, and also his blogs are worth reading, right? In the video there are some comments which were somewhat unkind, and many comments were saying that, oh well, Keith is single and he doesn't have parents to support, he doesn't have children to support, so it's easier to achieve financial freedom. Well, all that is true. I mean, it's just like I don't have children to support. I still have parents to support, but it's definitely easier to achieve financial freedom if we have fewer dependents. But if we do have dependents, that doesn't mean that we should not try to achieve financial freedom, right? It'll be more challenging, right? But if the philosophy is the right one, if our approach is the correct one, we will still achieve financial freedom one day. Maybe a bit later, but it's achievable, right? So anyway, that's just the video by Channel News Asia. Today I want to talk about my own numbers again, and that is whether I would be able to retire without worries very soon. Yeah, and of course, now some of you might feel a bit confused, what is AK talking about? Dementia's coming early to AK. Yeah, so didn't AK retire 8 years ago, a few months before he turned 45 years of age? Yes, I did. I retired from active employment about 8 years ago, and I've been enjoying retirement so far. But I'm talking about how to retire, really retire, as in I wouldn't have to actively manage my investment portfolio. Well, at least not as much, right? So I think I'm not really retired, completely retired, because to me that would mean not having to look at growing my wealth anymore, right? So I mean, I'm still pretty active when it comes to growing my wealth, and of course, most notably, I made the move to increase exposure to DBS, OCBC, and UOB, started in 2016, and I've continued till now. And so I'm still pretty active in managing my investment portfolio, right? So I look forward to the day when I can be absolutely laid back. Well, more laid back than just laid back. So if this sounds familiar to you, that means you have read my blog, which I published earlier in the day. I'll leave a link in the description box below as well for those people who would rather read my blog than to hear me talk to myself, right? So anyway, if I can achieve that, as in I would not have to actively manage my investment as much anymore, then I think I would have truly retired. And the question is, can I do it? And I think I can in another 2 years. This is because of, number one, my CPF money. Right? Like I said in the recent blog, I would be 55 in a couple of years. And that would be when my CPF accounts becomes a savings account. Right? And assuming that I stay with the full retirement sum in the CPF RA when I turn 55, that means I do not elect to go for ERS or enhanced retirement. I just keep the full retirement sum in the RA, and I maintain the prevailing basic healthcare sum, the BHS, in the MA, a MediSave account. I should have about $800,000 or more in my ordinary account when I turn 55, because anything that's in excess of the RA would go to my ordinary account from my SA, right? So simply leaving it in the ordinary account, right, if I were to do nothing, that would generate an interest of about $20,000 per year, right, based on 2.5% interest per annum. And I do not expect the low interest rate environment, which lasted 15 years from the global financial crisis, to come back and anytime soon, right? I don't see coming back for at least the next 10 years or something like this. I'm putting my neck out here to say this, but I think interest rates are going to stay higher for longer, and longer is really longer. It'll be for many years. Because there are so many inflationary risk around the world. When there's a war, prices goes up, and now we not just the Ukraine war, we have the war in the Middle East. Supply chains will get disrupted, and then of course we have a very strange accident in Baltimore where the cargo ship ran into a breach and all that kind of thing. The world isn't in a good place in more ways than one, right? And then of course now a potential flashpoint is in the South China Sea, and of course China, Taiwan, that kind of thing. So crossing fingers, but like I say, interest rates will probably staying higher for longer, and if things get worse geopolitically around the world, interest rates might even go higher. Who knows, right? If inflation stays very strong, right? So anyway, I do not expect the low interest rate environment to come back soon, right? I mean, it lasted for about 15 years from the global financial crisis, right? Or the QE. That's a thing of the past. So I expect cutoff yields for T-bills to stay around 3% or even higher in the next few years. So if I were to put my OA money to work, I could possibly get more than $20,000 per year, right, for my savings in the CPF OA. So I buy T-bills, and $800,000, it means that I'll be able to get about $24,000 per year if I were to put money into T-bills at a 3% yield. Okay. And number two, my emergency fund money, of course, is not just sitting in a biscuit tin or a mooncake tin at home. Like I say in a recent video, the money, I keep them in fixed deposits. So assuming a conservative 2% interest rate, I mean, right now it's higher than that. I think CIMB, the latest one was 3.3% for 3 months or 6 months fixed deposit. But let's say like 2 years away when I turn 55, interest rates, let's say at 2%, which is very conservative. 250K, I'll get $5,000 a year in interest income, right? And this also assumed that UOB1 account would have stopped offering a higher interest rate by then. So seeing how UOB has already reduced the interest rate from 5% to 4% for UOB1, it's a very reasonable assumption that 2 years later, I mean, this higher interest rate for UOB1 account might no longer exist, right? So now we have 2 years from now, that $24,000 per year from my OA money in T-bills, and $5,000 a year for my emergency fund kept in fixed deposits, right? So the next thing, point number 3, will be my T-bill ladder. So I also buy T-bills using cash, right? And I say that's where I keep my war chest. So I have about $200,000 in T-bills now. I shared in the recent video. And if the cutoff yields were to be 3%, like I said just now, it could be higher, but let's say just 3%. And for the next few years, and it's not unlikely, like say in an environment that's has higher for longer interest rates. $200,000, 3%, you generate $6,000 in interest income, right? But I'm likely to grow my money allocated to T-bills because my passive income generated yearly exceeds my expenses yearly. Right, so I I kind of estimate that I'll like probably excess $100,000 a year, which would help to grow my exposure to T-bills from $200,000 now to $400,000 2 years later. That was $100,000 a year. So you plus 100,000 plus 100,000 over the next 2 years, $200,000 plus $200,000 now, that's 400,000, right? So in effect, in 2 years later, my exposure to T-bills could double, right? And then if cutoff yield stays at 3%, I'll get $12,000 a year from T-bills in income, right? So number 4, we talk about fixed income. Now, fixed income was not attractive in a low interest rate environment, right, since the global financial crisis. And I had to look for more reasonable returns elsewhere. And obviously, this has changed in the last 2 years. And from the numbers I shared in the above 3 points, my CPF, my emergency fund, and T-bills bought using cash, from all the numbers I've crunched, 2 years from now in 2026, if I were to simply continue to buy more T-bills, use the money in my CPF account, 800K, to buy T-bills, and to maintain $250,000 fixed deposit emergency fund, I would have about $41,000 in income from these 3 sources, right? 24K from CPF, 5K from emergency fund, and 12K from T-bills using cash. For 41K of income per year from these 3 sources. Then, of course, not forgetting point number 5, my investment portfolio. If my investment portfolio continues to bring home the bacon, and I am inclined to think that it would, right, I would be very comfortable financially, right? And my investment portfolio generated some $230,000 in 2023, but this included passive income from T-bills. It's a very small contribution from T-bills, relatively speaking. But if I were to exclude this amount from the portfolio, to be more, then I would still have generated more than $220,000 in passive income, right? Like $225,000 in passive income. Now, for my investment portfolio, assuming that income generation takes a 10% hit because REITs continue to underperform in the next 2 years, which is not an unlikely scenario, I would still see about $200,000 of passive income from my investment portfolio. Now, the next thing is the unthinkable, but Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, our Prime Minister, our outgoing Prime Minister, has already said we should be prepared for disease X. Disease X, which might strike at any time, we don't know when, and that might result in another pandemic. So income generation could take a hit like what we saw during the lockdown, when banks paid less dividend. So let us say the banks pay 40% less dividend again, like what happened during the pandemic. And I have a 40% exposure to banks in my portfolio. So let's knock 40% off passive income generated by 40% of my portfolio. And that would see only $170,000 generated by my investment portfolio. And of course, this includes the assumption that REITs would perform poorly as well, like I said earlier, right? So assuming that I'm still comfortable with living on $48,000 a year and comfortable with setting aside another $48,000 for parental support 2 years from now, if I have $170,000 of passive income from my investment portfolio, right, I think I shouldn't have to worry about money, right? So this is in addition to the income I'll receive from fixed income sources like say CPF, fixed deposits, and T-bills. So the total passive income, looking at all the points that I've mentioned so far, with the aid of fixed income in an environment of higher interest rates, in 2 years from now, I would have a truly worry-free retirement, because right now I still cannot access my CPF money, right? But I believe 2 years from now, I'll have other worries, right? My parents growing older, then I'm also growing older, there'll be health problems and all that kind of thing, I'm quite sure. Can't run away from these things. So this entire exercise is a very personal one, because I just want to see will there come a point when I wouldn't have to worry about whether I've sufficient financial resources? And I'm a born worrier. I worry a lot. But 2 years from now, I think I can truly stop worrying about money, right? Because of how I'll have access to my CPF money, and how I would have grown my cash position even more, which would go into T-bills, like I said. So having come to this realization, I have decided that I don't have to look at the stock market as much as before in the meantime, right? So what I'm going to do is that unless there is another stock market crash, I'm just going to simply hold my stock positions and continue to buy more T-bills whenever I have excess funds, right? So it is a very robotic approach, and but I think it makes sense for me, and it gives me peace of mind, right? However, I must say that this is naturally going to translate to fewer blogs and fewer videos from me on related topics in future, right? So but don't worry, it doesn't mean that AK is gone. I will probably still have like quarterly updates and that kind of thing, right? And this is something I've been thinking of on and off, right? But it is really the first time I've sat down and really look at the numbers more carefully, projecting into the future, right? Because I've always said we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We can only plan for the future. But now I can really see the fruits of my plans. Plans which I've carefully thought of and meticulously executed over the years, right? And this is just the near future I'm looking at. It's just 2 years from now, but it's enough to give me some comfort. I will have to talk to myself again on this when I turn 55 2 years from now. And well, to anyone who is eavesdropping, this isn't a miracle. What I've achieved isn't a miracle. And what I have achieved shouldn't be a dream for other people either, right? It isn't a miracle and it isn't a dream either. And I have talked to myself extensively since 2009 in my blog on the things I've done to make my current situation a reality. So it is possible for everyone, right? I mean, regular readers will know I did have a roadmap, right? And I've stuck to it over the years. So stay prudent, have patience, be pragmatic, right? If AK can do it, so can you. Bye-bye.